and welcome to another episode of A Dash of Chaos. It has been quite a while since I did an episode. I think it's been about 2 months or something like that. Basically, long story short, life just got a little busy. Where I live, everything is kind of reopening from being in various lockdowns, things like that. So I basically just had to go back to not working from home and actually going into work. But other than that, everything has been pretty much the same. And I really have been wanting to come back and record a new episode because I love doing this so much. So one of the things I have been doing kind of, to relax and, just kind of decompress from work is I actually rewatched all of The Legend of Korra. And this is what the episode is going to be about. I think I'm just going to kind of talk about how I felt this time around rewatching it. This is my third rewatch of the show. And it's really interesting because obviously I understood the impact of Korrasami and what that meant for media and especially for animated shows. But I felt this time around, I kind of went into it thinking, okay, I'm gonna rewatch this and see if it did actually feel like it was sort of out of nowhere, like people claim it is, and if it was just kind of like my shipper goggles the first or second time around. And honestly, I can say that I think people are full of crap. I think it was not obviously as developed or as explicit as people would like, but I think there was so much going on there, and there was so much of a struggle to even get those things that I think people tend to forget kind of the context of where TV was at in the early 2010, sorry, when the show started, which was, I believe, 2012. And to kind of ignore that is a little, like, it does a disservice to what it meant and how shows nowadays, especially animated shows, are kind of standing on the back of what that show did, and a couple other shows as well, but I won't talk about those shows. But for this, I just felt, I feel like there was an unfair advantage for the show in general, because Avatar The Last Airbender is so well loved, well liked and loved by so many audiences, that there was an expectation. And one of the criticisms I see a lot about The Legend of Korra, which really kind of irks me and pisses me off really, is that people will say like, oh, I didn't really like Legend of Korra because it wasn't Avatar The Last Airbender. And first of all, I hate that comparison. Like, not liking something because it isn't something else is ridiculous, because it's, you have to kind of look at something for what it is. But for this in particular, what I always felt was obvious, and even just from the title, that Legend of Korra, and it's specifically saying her name, was that this story was much more personal. And I felt with Avatar The Last Airbender, there was so much world building because it was like a new show, and you had to learn about like all the nations and everything like that. People were expecting the show to be a lot more, I guess, grander and wider, and expanding upon, okay, how did we get from the end of Avatar The Last Airbender to now, which is where Legend of Korra's story starts. And they were just kind of like, oh, what happened in the in-between? What happened to the world? And that show was really very much about Korra, which is obvious. But I mean, in the sense of like, it's a very personal story. And I think what always made me feel like it was so powerful was that Korra's journey is really intense, because obviously we know she's the Avatar. She knows that she's the Avatar, but for her, like, she absolutely feels that being the Avatar is like her entire existence, and like it is who she is. It's not just who she, like, what she does or what her role is in the world. And I think that was super important because the struggle she goes through and kind of the narrative, um, I guess, conflicts, if you want to call it, is very much about that, and it challenges who Korra is as a person, and it challenges who is she if she isn't the Avatar. And so there's a lot of really, it's a lot of like physical and psychological things that happen to her. She gets her bending removed, she gets poisoned. Like, it's very much to do with her abilities to be an Avatar, and her discovering what that actually means, and what it means in relation to her when she believes that being the Avatar is her entire existence. So I always thought that was a really powerful story, and I thought Korra was such a cool character because she was so much more, like, for lack of a better word, like rougher around the edges. Um, and she was just so cool. Like, I thought it was great to just kind of have this sort of character who was so sure in those abilities, and to see them taken away and to see how she responds. Um, I thought it was such a, like, an amazing story that they told, and this is not to say that the show wasn't, it didn't struggle in places, because it did. I'd have to say, like, even in this rewatch, I barely got through season two, um, which is my least favorite season, and it still remained that. I was wondering, like, oh, I haven't seen it in a couple of years. Maybe I'll change my opinion on it, but it was still a very weak season for me. But really, what I noticed was season three and four, and kind of the Korrasami development, is that, um, yes, it's quite subtle, and I'm sure they were fighting to even get any scenes between them. And that's the biggest thing, is that, like, they're, when I think about it and I think about how important it is, I think about what kind of struggles and what kind of conversations you had to have with Nickelodeon and whoever the execs were and all that fun stuff, to say, I just want this scene with Korra and Asami, like, hugging, or I want the scene where they bond together, and how much that must have been a struggle just to do that. And, for all its faults, in the end of it, it's just these creators wanted to give these two characters and have queer representation, specifically bisexual representation, which is so important to me, as someone who is bisexual, just to see that on screen. And, technically this is like a Nickelodeon kids show. Like, they just wanted, like, little queer kids to have these characters out there, and that to me is extremely beautiful. And I feel like people forget how powerful that is in the 2014 or whatever year it was. But what I kind of went on a tangent there, but what I really did notice was that, this time around with the rewatch, it's like, for me, I'm just like, oh, like, maybe it's because I know it's happening, but, like, Korra and Asami really just start spending a lot of time together, and Asami is just there, very supportive, and is kind of there when Korra's at her lowest. And to me, I was just like, oh, this is, I just remember thinking, like, oh, I love all these moments, and yeah, I totally ship them, like, all the fun stuff, like, oh my god, they looked at each other. And I thought all of these things, genuinely, believing that nothing would happen, because why would it? And it never would. Like, it's an impossibility in this TV show, and just in general. And then when it did happen, it was just so shocking and emotional and special. And it still is very special, and I felt it this time around. I watched that, I got to the last episode, and they're walking towards the spirit world, and I just felt it. I felt very emotional about it. And it has nothing to do with the nostalgia of it or anything like that. It's really everything to do with, wow, this was such a jumping point, and this was such a moment. And I kind of find that Korrasami, they get a little bit left behind nowadays when people talk about queer representation in TV shows, especially with queer women and queer women of color. And it is really sad, and I know why it happens, but it doesn't stop me from being frustrated. And I was kind of like tweeting a lot during my rewatches, especially when it got to like season 4. And as emotional as I got rewatching that last episode and honestly the last 2 seasons, it reminded me of how annoyed and how frustrated I am about them as a couple, because there's so much criticism of it wasn't developed enough, or it came out of nowhere, or it's not as good as people think it is. And it's like, and for me personally, of course, I wish there was a little bit more development, but at the same time, what we got for that time was absolutely just like game changing. It was incredible, and they were these 2 amazing characters that just, you know, complemented each other so well and took no shit. And again, it was bisexual rep. Like even now in the 2020s, it's the struggle to get good bisexual rep in characters, and for that to even happen, and for it to be women of color, the impact of that will never not be special. And again, it's really sad and frustrating that they've kind of been left in the dirt and kind of been forgotten as a whole when it comes to fandom. And I know that's like a pretty broad statement, because I know there's so many people that I follow or who are mutuals with me that love Korrasami and love Legend of Korra and will, you know, like die on the same hill with me. But it is a very small group that kind of still raises them up and talks about them. And it's sad because I think about certain other ships, like especially like queer ships, and of course there are white ships, and they're the ones that are talked about for years and how groundbreaking they were, and etc. And you know, I don't want to get too much into that because that's a whole other discussion, but it's all part of the frustration that I've always felt watching television. And for me, it's like this show was just so special, and again, it remains special. And I really hope that people start rewatching it and kind of go back to it and start to recognize the context of how that show was created, of how Legend of Korra came about, is so important. And it just gets the recognition it deserves. I feel like Avatar: The Last Airbender, and don't get me wrong, I love Avatar: The Last Airbender. I think it's brilliant. I genuinely think Legend of Korra is a better TV show, and I know that's like, I'm in the minority there, and it's the unpopular opinion. So, and I don't really care. I say whatever I want to say about the things that I love, but I really hope that there is kind of a resurgence of talking about Legend of Korra and recognizing how special it actually is. And I really just wanted to get my thoughts out into a podcast episode. I don't really care if this is like a full episode or not. It's just I've been tweeting about it, and there's been such great response, and I just really wanted to, you know, get my words out there somewhere. And I really encourage people who have watched the show before and who have maybe had a lot more negative opinions about it, maybe now that some time has passed, I definitely suggest rewatching it. And I definitely suggest, you know, trying to think about it in now how much media has come out since then and what it was before, and what we have now, and how much we have moved from there. And the funny thing is like we haven't moved that far, um, especially in animated shows. I know there are a lot of animated shows that people are talking about nowadays, but like for this period of time to have moved from Legend of Korra to now, and the fact that Legend of Korra and Korrasami get forgotten and are not talked about as often, that is sad in itself, because it's like if we're going to move forward from, that show struggling to even get them basically to be canon, um, we can't forget about it, and how much and how difficult it was to even have that content out there. It's part of like animated show history, and I don't know. I just felt really strongly and passionate about rewatching the show, and it really just, I don't know, it reminded me of kind of recognizing, and or I guess I think with that show it was really where I started to recognize that I was very much on the outside looking in when it came to kind of fandom experiences, especially queer fandom experiences. Again, I don't want to get into too much detail about that, but because it reminded me of that, it also reminded me that um, I hold on to it so dearly, and a lot of people um, tend to just kind of brush over it, and I, I hope it doesn't get lost even more so than it has already. I really do hope that there's kind of a resurgence to rewatch it, and people start loving it, and just kind of look back and be like, you know what, it wasn't as bad as I thought, or maybe I had a certain opinion, I had a certain expectation, and without those expectations, I'm watching it now, and it's fantastic. And basically, just kind of the overall, um, just to kind of summarize this, and again, this is a very short episode. I just really recorded this on a whim. It's just that I hope you do watch it if you've never seen it before. If you've been hesitant to watch it, definitely check it out. It's a great show. It has great characters. Korra is an amazing character, like I said. Um, Korrasami aside, like it's such a great show. And if you've seen it before, and you haven't watched it in a while, I do suggest rewatching it. I think it's worth a rewatch after a couple of years away. I, I I just felt like I was enjoying myself so much, and it just being able to go through those motions, and go through Korra's journey again was very special. And yeah, and if you love Korrasami, like say so in the comments, or um, DM me about it, or if you ever want to talk about it, that I would love that, because I think it's a conversation I love having, and I think it's a conversation worth having. If you want to talk about queer representation in television shows, and especially bisexual representation, it's so special. And again, sorry if you feel like I've just totally wasted your time with this Korrasami rant, but if you did decide to listen to this kind of shorter episode, thank you, I guess. And I do hope to kind of get back into recording episodes. I have missed it, and if you stayed, and have decided to actually listen to this episode after like 2 months away, then thank you for staying. And I will be back soon, hopefully, and if probably have a bit more topics, and a bit more refined, and kind of a flow of a episode. This is really, I just wanted to get it out there. So again, thank you for listening if you join me, and make sure you follow the Twitter account, and subscribe if you do like what you hear. And hopefully soon I will be back with another episode of A Dash of Chaos. And again, thanks for being here.